There are so many different opinions and perspectives and tips on how the shoulders should be positioned for downward facing dog. Now, I'm going to share my perspective with you as someone who leans more towards having a hypermobile body and someone who's been teaching thousands of different bodies for almost 19 years now. So the first thing that I want to do is share with you how I believe the shoulders should be positioned and why that is. And then the second thing, which is really important for your teaching, is how you can actually encourage your students to engage in that type of activity. Because it's one thing to know as a yoga teacher what is a more optimal position or what you would like your students to do, and it's a whole other thing to actually effectively translate that to them and get them to really be responsive to what it is that you are sharing with them. So let's start first and foremost with a tabletop position. Now, similar to how we would do like a high plank, how we would even do a transition if we're trying to get the feet to step towards the hands, any type of movement where we have to push the ground away, downward dog is similar. Now, the thing that happens sometimes is that we take this action and we ramp it up and we sometimes do it too much or we overemphasize it too much. And this is where you see a lot of people are kind of choking themselves like this, and they're really squeezing the shoulders up towards the ears and scrunching into the neck. So as a result of that, then we see these other kinds of corrections and suggestions going on, which is to draw the shoulder blades down the back. And that also becomes very extreme. We overemphasize it or we overdo it. So I always like to say that downward dog involves a little bit of push and a little bit of wrap. Now, the push we're going to talk about first. So obviously, when we're in something like a tabletop or even a plank, we're going to be pushing the ground away to a certain extent. Otherwise, everything is just going to collapse down. So if you are focusing on that, then that is going to take care of any tendency to collapse into the shoulder joint, which oftentimes looks a lot like this. We're kind of just hanging out here. This is the front view. Okay, my shoulder blades are down my back, but I'm not really active here. I'm literally just resting in my joints. From the side, you can see it looks a little bit like this, where I'm just hanging out in the shoulder joints, okay? So if we emphasize now the pushing element, you can see the difference, and I'm going to go extreme with that. I'm going to push, and I'm going to be really extreme with it. This is, quite a lot for me. My down dog's a bit short right now. I probably would open it up normally. There's the side view. And then here we've got the extreme version of going into that push, right? We're relaxed. And then we go, rah! And we really push. And then if I were to drop it out here, I'm here. And I'm squeezing and crunching in here. And the reverse is I'm here. And I'm just hanging, and I'm not actually utilizing my internal muscular capacity to support myself. So the idea of pushing the ground away is very important, very key for downward dog, because this is a weight-bearing pose. The body requires engagement to be in this pose, and that engagement naturally happens when we go into that action of pushing. However, when we push too much, we end up with this kind of thing. And when we emphasize relaxing the shoulder blades too much or drawing them down the back, then we're hanging in the joints. So this is where I'm going back to that suggestion to emphasize the push and the wrap. And this is going to be different for every single body. So from the side, it might look a little bit like this into downward facing dog. And then
Maybe you see one of your students and they're really emphasizing that push and they've got their shoulders touching their ears. Then you would want to emphasize and you would want to see them going into a little bit of that spreading and wrapping energy where the shoulder blades are spreading apart. And when I say wrap, I mean as if the armpits are trying to face each other, the shoulder blades are starting to slightly wrap around the upper back. Not a crazy amount, because that's not so great for someone that's, especially for someone that's more hypermobile, okay? But you want your students to be able to feel where they can engage in either of those actions. To what degree, that really depends on the person. Okay, so here from this angle, you can see if I'm kind of just at the midway point, we'll go into really pushing and I'm overdoing it. And then I'm going to add a little bit of wrapping energy as if my armpits are trying to face each other. The shoulder blades slightly wrap. Now if I go into too much wrap, then here, I'm not engaged anymore. I'm just hanging out. So if you saw someone here, then you would want to emphasize that they push. They push the ground away just a little bit more in order to be able to create that engagement that supports the shoulder and the body in that position. So as a teacher, you really want to look for positions in the body that are not excessively here or excessively here, but that there is an ability for your students to engage, to press, to almost have the energy to like hop off of the hands if they needed to. So they would feel into, where that energy is. And if they're kind of here, then you would just get them to press a little bit. And you can see where it transfers my weight and it allows me to get length. Now, the thing that you really want to be mindful of is through that length, especially with some, hypermobility, is this kind of thing happening, right? And this might look cool or pretty, but it's absolutely dysfunctional. So we want to make sure that those ribs stay in and that pressing energy is not like overdoing it and totally overshadowing the wrapping energy, and vice versa as well. We don't want that wrapping energy to also be something that is totally overshadowing. So both of these things are important. Now, when it comes to teaching your students the press and the wrap, there are so many different things that you can do, but one of the most beneficial things that I have found is to do this before you ever get them to go up into downward facing dog. You could get them to do it against a wall. You can get them to do it open chain. So just exactly as I am here, getting them to feel into the press and then getting them to feel into the wrap. You could get them to lay down on their back, and you could start the class in that way where you're really emphasizing them feeling this. Now, I've just been showing you it from this position, but you can also do it overhead, getting your students to feel into how those shoulders just move enough for them to feel where that pressing energy and that wrapping energy is coming from. But the single most effective thing that I have ever seen to work when it comes to this type of thing is getting your students to experience this in tabletop through moving into a cat position and then getting them to maintain that as they go up into their downward facing dog. So I'll get them to come into something like this, and then I'll get them to really press the ground away, tuck the chin in towards the chest. And here we've got the wrapping energy going on, but we've also got the pressing energy going on. They're going to tuck their toes, and then I instruct them to keep this position through the upper body. And then I instruct them to keep this energy. Push down through the toes, through the hands, hover the knees. Keep the chin diving towards the chest. Push the hands, and then raise the body slowly. Push the hands, raise, push the hands, raise, push the hands, raise. And if they get to a point where they're starting to have their chest sink towards their thighs, again, you can cue ribs in, but also they might need to do just a little bit more of a wrapping energy. And then they're working on possibly bringing the legs into a little bit more of a lengthened state. Do they need a wider stance? And letting the head soften down, and then getting them to push. And then you can get them to come back into that position where they're in that cat spine again. So those are some things that you can do
really getting them to understand before you get them into downward facing dog about this kind of movement, about the press, about the wrap, about the way the shoulders move. I have not even mentioned the positioning of the hands, but I will just quickly say that they don't have to be like this. For some people, they might need to turn either inwards or outwards, just depending on the body. Downward dog is not a resting pose, and if we teach it in that way, we are greatly doing a disservice to our students and the health of their shoulders. So I highly encourage you to explore and play with the suggestions that I've made in this video here. And if you found this to be really useful, make sure that you let me know in the comments, like this video, subscribe to my channel, and if you're interested in improving and developing your teaching to be more supportive for the students that are in your class, make sure that you use the link in the description of this video to book a call with me, and we can discuss how I might be able to help you with that.